About scared myself. Well, good evening. We are in Ecclesiastes chapter 9. If you want to open up to that, Ecclesiastes chapter 9. As we get into chapter 9, as the book points out for us, give me 1 second. As the book points out for us, we notice, that's the book we're using, you're welcome. The book points out that we notice that up through chapter 8 or so, Solomon has been really tearing down a lot of the things that we do, the normal things, the normal behaviors of human nature, the things that happen, the things that we pursue. And throughout the first 8 chapters, we've looked at materialism, how Solomon talks about materialism. The one who dies with the most is obviously the one who's been the most successful in life. And we apply that to ourselves and how we see that affects us. He talks about the playboy culture. If it feels good, do it. You only live once. You know, that's what we always hear people say. You only live once, so do whatever you want to do. And then he talked about humanism, doing it our way. My way, as long as I do it myself and do it my way, then I've been successful. And then he also talks about fatalism. It's the vanity of vanities. You live, you die, the end, and there's nothing else to look forward to. And so because of that, there's really no hope of anything else. And that leaves us feeling miserable as well. Now as we get into chapter 9, after he's kind of torn down all of those things, as we get into chapter 9, which is lesson 9 and page 49 in the book, as we get to that, now he's going to begin to kind of build back up. In the book, Wilson talks about like if you're building a house, if you're building something, you know, you got to kind of tear down and restart it sometimes and build that foundation and rebuild what you're trying to build. And so that's where we're at getting into chapter 9 this evening. Before we jump into the text, though, let's begin with a prayer. And Jamie, would you mind to lead us in prayer tonight?
Heavenly Father, we come this evening giving thanks for this great day you blessed us with, and we're so very thankful for this time that's been set aside to open up a portion of your word and study from it. Pray that we do so with open hearts and open minds and apply it to our everyday lives. Pray to be with Eric and all the teachers this hour to give them a ready remembrance of those things they prepared to say. We ask forgiveness of our sins in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. All right, so chapter 9 is where we are at. And so let's begin by noticing the first, 6 or so verses here. Let's go over read the first 9 verses of chapter 9, and then we'll kind of go back through and talk about these things. Ecclesiastes chapter 9, beginning in verse 1. For I have given all this to my heart, and explained it that righteous men, wise men in their service, are in the hand of God. Man does not know whether it will be love or hatred. Anything may be before him. It is the same for all. There is one fate for the righteous and for the wicked, for the good, for the clean, and for the unclean. For the man who offers a sacrifice, for the one who does not sacrifice. As the good man is, so is the sinner. As the swearer is, so is the one who is afraid to swear. This is an evil in all that is done under the sun, that there is one fate for all. Furthermore, the hearts of the sons of men are full of evil, and madness is in their hearts throughout their lives. Afterwards they go to the dead. For whoever is joined with all the living, there is confidence, surely a live dog is better than a dead lion. For the living know they will die, but the dead do not know anything, nor have any longer a reward, for the memory of them is forgotten. Indeed, their love, their hate, and their zeal have already perished, and they will never again have a portion in all that is done under the sun. Go then, eat your bread in gladness, and drink your wine with a merry heart, for God has already accepted your works. Let your clothes be white, all the time, and let not oil be lacking on your head. See life with the woman whom you love, all the days of your vain life, which he has given you under the sun, all the days of your vanity, for this is your portion in life, and in your labor in which you have labored under the sun. Solomon in these verses here really talk about four great realities of life. And I think as Wilson points out, this section kind of gives us some perspective about life and the things that are most important, the things that we are pursuing. Before we get into the four things that Wilson talks about, what are some things that kind of jump off of the page for you reading those verses? Is there anything that kind of sticks out to you? Yeah. Death is not something we're going to escape. Death is not something we're going to avoid. Death is something that we're as long as the Lord doesn't return, we're all going to experience in this lifetime. And because of that, what else does Solomon talk about in this that jumps out at you? Yeah. I think sometimes we read Ecclesiastes and we look and we focus on the vanity of vanities and how negative, don't do this, don't do that, don't pursue things, don't pursue pleasures, don't pursue all of that. And sometimes we read Ecclesiastes from a very negative mindset. And we almost read it like, well, Solomon's telling us I can't have any fun at all. Can we have fun, Jamie? Yeah, we can have fun. Now, is our fun different than the world's idea of fun at times? Sure it is. But you know what I found out? The world's fun, what they think is unfun, when they begin to experience the joy that we have, they realize, hey, this is actually pretty fun too. For instance, take a bunch of kids and go to summer camp. No phones for an entire week. Can you believe that? We asked the kids to stay off their phones for an entire week. Not bell to bell like school, which is, I think, there's some good in that. Not check it at nighttime, but put it away during the day. For an entire week, no phones. No outside influences, and there's fun. We can have fun ourselves. Did I see a hand over this way? I thought I saw something. Okay. So we can have fun, and Solomon is not telling us that life is boring and there's no enjoyment to be found here on this earth. But he's reminding us of some very important principles as we go through life that bring lasting joy, true joy, not the temporal joy that the world offers. Any other things jump off of the page as you read through this section? Yes, Roy. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. We see the great beauty in those relationships that we have, the relationships with our spouse that we need to be building upon. I also find in this that we'll talk about here as well, and Evan kind of pointed it out about death happens to all. I want you to notice how he talks about death in this. It's the same for all. One fate for the righteous, one fate for the wicked. The end of time here, it really looks the same for both the righteous and the wicked. How many funerals have we gone to for those who would probably be considered wicked by the way they live their lives. And how many funerals have we gone to for those who were faithful? And the funerals were about the same. It's one fate. And so we've got to look past what the world sees. Unless you're, someone really famous, you talk about Dolly Parton just passed away yesterday. I have a feeling her funeral is going to be really, really big and really grand. Probably a lot of musicians, and it's going to think it's great. Guess what? Her fate is the same as anybody else. Death happens to us all. And so let's notice these four great realities. Verse number 1. Again, I have given all this to my heart and explained it that righteous men, wise men, and their service are in the hand of God. Man does not know whether it will be love or hatred, anything may be before him. The first thing we have to remember as we think about these realities of life and finding joy in life, the first thing we have to remember is that God is in control. And I think that's difficult for us at times. On the surface, that seems easy, right? When we talk about life itself and in our words, that's easy for us to say, well, God is in control. God is in control. How many times do our life actions, the things that we do day to day, match that statement when we say God is in control? It's easy to say it, but how many of us are trying to control God from our end? Sometimes we do it by the way we pray. God, if you would just give me this, I would serve you all my life. God, if you would just do this one thing for me, it will help me be faithful to you. Or maybe it's not that we pray that way. Maybe we're like Abraham and Sarah. Abraham and Sarah had a promise given to them by God, and that promise was what? They would have a child. How old was Sarah when this promise was made? Almost 80. And how much time between that promise and when she had the child? It was almost 20 years, I believe. If I'm thinking correctly, my math is right. So what happens during that time when the promise is made to Sarah and Abraham, they're going to have a child, and they're waiting and they're waiting, and that child doesn't come? What do Abraham and Sarah decide to do? Yeah. God, you're taking too long, so we'll speed this along. And so Sarah gives Abraham one of her servants, and so Hagar goes in, lies with Abraham, and conceives a child who we know as Ishmael. And so there's the idea that God's promised this, but it's not happening, so we'll make things happen in our time. How many times do we make decisions in life because things aren't happening quick enough for us? And so we kind of dictate and act like, well, God is in control, but I'm going to kind of hold on to control myself. It's difficult sometimes, I think, to really let go completely. But I want you to notice the difference in Solomon. Before he says God is in control, how did Solomon live his life? What things did Solomon pursue? And that we see early on in the book of Ecclesiastes. Building things? Yeah, he built a lot of things, right? Some of the most expensive buildings and things that could ever imagine Solomon built. What else did Solomon do? Yeah. Solomon was able to do whatever Solomon wanted to do. And so, how many wives did Solomon have?
700 wives, 300 concubines, so 1,000 women.
Yeah. Could you imagine? Be careful, Larry. Everything Solomon wanted. And as Solomon tested all the waters of life and wanted to do everything Solomon wanted to do, Solomon always came back to the same phrase. What did Solomon say about all these things? Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. It was all worthless. And so Solomon had to realize that God is in control. Life is meaningless without God in it. The stresses that we go through, the struggles that we go through, they wouldn't be worth it if we weren't serving God. We might as well give up if we're not going to serve God. And so Solomon concludes that we are not mindless robots stumbling blindly through life. Our life is in the hands of God. And what we see in point number 1 there, I guess Roman numeral 1.8.1, there Wilson says, being in God's hands does not guarantee a high-paying job, a perfect marriage, or even a great report on your medical checkup. It does mean that God will do what God thinks is best. It does mean that He will never leave you nor forsake you, as Hebrews 13 tells us. It does mean that behind whatever happens is a God who cares. And I think that's where I think we struggle. When we say God is in control, I think that's where we struggle to actually live that out. How many of us in our lifetime have ever barely scraped by in life? Living difficult, just barely have enough money to put food on the table and a roof over our head. Does that mean God didn't care? Does that mean God didn't care about us? God didn't? No. How many of us have ever had a bad report of health? Time and chance happen to all of us. But in those moments, those difficult moments, can we still say God is in control? Or those moments, are we trying to pull the strings to get God to do what we want? Any thoughts on that? The idea of God being in control. Larry, you're so much farther over. Second point that we see in this, in verses 2 and 3, is, as the text says, is death is certain. Again, it is the same for all. There is one fate for the righteous, one for the wicked, for the good, for the clean, and for the unclean, for the man who offers sacrifice, for the one who does not sacrifice. As the good man is, so is the sinner. As the swearer is, so is the one who is afraid to swear. And so Solomon talks about what we don't like to talk about, and that is death. Death is not a subject that we talk about enough. But death is it's a reality for all of us. The Bible is clear to tell us that death is certain. We're told that it's appointed for man to die once. After this comes the judgment. James chapter 4 talks about life being but a vapor that appears for a little time and vanishes away. Our lives are short. I had a Bible class teacher when I was in high school, and I might have done this here before too, but he would hold up a pen. Actually, what he'd do is he'd draw a black line on the whiteboard, just a straight black line. He'd say, imagine that line for eternity that way, and the line eternity that way. And then he'd take up a pen like that, and he'd put the point up against the whiteboard. He said, can you see that point? He said, that's your life. In the big picture, in eternity's big picture, your life is a speck. It's that small. In the big picture, when we think about all of eternity, our lives are that short. And so, we have to remember death is something that we will face. It's not something that we can run away from. And as he talks about, as we already kind of mentioned, it's the same. Rich or poor, wise or foolish, good or bad, death is something that we must all face. And so we can take that one of two ways. If death is something that we're all going to face, we could say, well, if I'm going to die, then I might as well live my life however I want because death is going to happen. Or we can look at it from the other side and say, I'm going to die. That means I need to be responsible with my life and understand there's something greater past this life. The reward that we're waiting for. Which life do we want to choose? The life of no hope or the life of hope with a relationship with Jesus Christ? Yes, sir. Yeah. Yeah. Again, we can't. We see that a lot of people trying to play God and dictate how things are going to go. Well, we don't know. We don't know what tomorrow brings. That's what James talks about. We don't know what's in store for tomorrow. So our job today is to do what? If I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, what's my job today? Take care of today. Be faithful today. We're told to pick up our cross when? When are we told to pick up our cross? Yeah, daily. Every day. Pick up your cross and follow him daily. It's not a one-time event. It's not something we renew, contract we renew every 10 years. Pick up our cross daily and follow him. And I also point out point number 3. Chris, did you have your hand up a minute ago?
I'm just going to say, you're talking about that Richard Ford. You mentioned Dolly Parton other than funeral. Actually, I read this week and requested a very small, simple private funeral for me and family. I guess that sticks out to me. I don't know what her spiritual life was, but it sticks out to me. Everyone always tries to spend their whole life getting ahead and see somebody that really had it all. That at the end of their life is realizing that death comes for everybody. Want something so simple that really puts in perspective of what you can actually something a lot of people feel like is important to you.
Yeah. There's so many different views about death. So many people have different ideas of, we hear it all the time. I just know that they're fishing the biggest lake up in heaven, or I know they're driving the best race cars up in heaven. I know that they're sewing the biggest quilt up there. Why do we try to make heaven about what we want? Roy. Yeah. Do you know what the Bible says about what's going to happen when we're in heaven? We're going to be face to face with God. I don't think any of us are going to be concerned about fishing, about driving a car, about playing a game, sewing a quilt, because we're going to be face to face with God. That is what we're going to be, where we're going to be, in his presence. And so we do shape heavens by our earthly views and what we do here. And to be fair, none of us actually know. None of us have been to heaven to talk about what it's like, right? But we do know we'll be face to face with God. Because the Bible tells us we'll be face to face with God. But I want to talk about point 3 under B. Point B, subpoint 3, Solomon labels death exactly what it is, an evil. It is an enemy, a monster that intrudes our lives. We were created by a living God to live forever with him. Death, however, comes as payment for the wages of our sinful rebellion. It is a constant reminder that we are cut off from the tree of life. Truly, only in the one who paid the ultimate sacrifice for sin do we find hope beyond physical death. And I think that's important for us to remember. Death is a part of life because of man's sinful nature. And because of that, it is an evil. Death itself is an evil. Does that mean we need to be afraid of death? No. But it's understanding it's an evil that we must all face. And without God in it, without God in our lives, there is no hope. But serving Christ today, being faithful to Christ today, and listening to His commands and being faithful to Him, we die in hope. And so when this life comes to an end, we don't have to fear because we know who holds tomorrow. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what heaven's going to be like. But we know the one who's in control. And so getting ourselves to the point where we can submit ourselves to Christ in that way is super important. Any thoughts on that? Larry.
I think the idea that we do have hope, that we have something to look forward to, is so special that I know back in the 60s, I believe it was, which you don't know anything about, I believe it was Blood, Sweat, and Tears had a song, Spinning Wheel, that says, I can swear there ain't no heaven, and I pray there ain't no hell. And that's about sums up what someone without any faith has to look forward to.
Yeah. And how sad is that? How sad is that we go through this whole life with no hope? We realize death is going to happen. I think everyone understands death happens to all, right? Even those who don't believe in God or believe in Jesus, they realize death is a part of life. But how empty would that be to think that when we die, that's it? Hope is one of the most beautiful things that we have to hold on to. It gives purpose to life. It gives us something to push forward to. It gives us something to set our minds to. And then we begin to find contentment when we don't have everything that everybody else has. We begin to find contentment knowing that no matter what I face in life, the ultimate reward is waiting for us in heaven. Again, where we get to be face to face with God. Point C there in the book, without God, man is mean and mad. We live in a cruel world that often borders on the insane. If you don't believe that, turn on the nightly news for just about 10 minutes, and you'll see how cruel this world really is. You see it all the time. I've not followed anything about it. I don't know really anything about it, but there's apparently a big trial going on right now about a mother who killed her children and claimed that there was postpartum depression involved and other women supporting her in that. I don't know the details of the case, just what I've seen, some of the things about it. That's an evil in the world. Children were killed. We live in a cruel world. Turn on the news and you'll see in the Louisville area nightly, almost nightly, there's someone that's been shot, someone that's been killed. Things happen all the time. You see it even in schools. Kids who just are just mean and hateful towards other kids. We live in a cruel world. Why do you think people, especially those without God in their life, without hope, why do you think they choose evil? I know there's some who don't follow God, don't have faith in God, that overall are still pretty good people, But why do some people just choose evil? What is it that drives someone to that point to be evil? Yeah. Unfortunately, there's some people, there's a lot of people in the church who don't live really what it's like to be a Christian. I think a lot of what we see today, though, is driven by bitterness and anger and pain that's been experienced in life. How many of us have ever gone through painful experiences in life? If those things aren't handled well, and we don't have hope and have the backing of what forgiveness is and how to forgive, if we don't have that and we hold that in, that makes us bitter. And then we become jealous of people who have things that we don't. Sometimes we become envious of them, and then pride gets us. And it just kind of opens the floodgates for all these thoughts and emotions to come, and to the point where we can no longer control those emotions. And then what happens? We choose violence. We choose that angry path. And so what Solomon sees is that without God, this is what man is. Man is evil. And again, that happened because why? Because man sinned before God. It all happened because sin happened in the Garden of Eden. And sin was introduced in the world. And so Solomon concludes verses 4 through 6 there by saying, with God there is hope. With God there is hope. Solomon quotes a popular proverb, a live dog is better than a dead lion. What does Solomon mean in that? A live dog is better than a dead lion. If you had a live lion, would you want it as a pet?
I think in this situation, we have to remember, dogs are not kept as pets at this time.
Yeah.
You're talking about the mongrel. You're talking about the ones that run through the tents, grabbing food from people. It's just a despicable animal. The lion was also known as majestic. So what Solomon is looking at is the idea that it is better to have a live dog than a dead lion, no matter how majestic it is. Once it's dead, it's gone. Once you have something that's alive, there's still hope at the end.
Yeah. And that's, I think, exactly what Solomon is trying to get at. And Brian's right. The dogs, they didn't have their golden doodles, that, they'd had to put up when someone came over. Or they didn't have their teacup poodles that they carried around in bags and showed off. They didn't have their fancy dog shows. They were more wild animals than anything. And so there is a difference there in those things, in what we see. And if there is life, there is hope. With God, there is hope. Verse 5, he says, for the living know they will die, but the dead do not know anything, nor have they any longer reward, for the memory of them is forgotten. That knowledge should motivate preparation, that we should prepare ourselves because death is coming. Jesus gave a parable of 10 women. 5 were foolish, 5 were wise. What made the five wise in that parable? Yeah, the bridegroom was coming, but the bridegroom was delayed. And so the 5 brought extra oil with them, and when the bridegroom was delayed, they were still able to go in because they could light their lamps. The 5 foolish had to go back and buy more oil. They weren't prepared. And at the end of that parable, Jesus says, what? Does Jesus open the door for them? He says, I never knew you. They weren't ready. And so we have to make the preparations today so that we can prepare to meet God. As a result of death, as we see here later on in verse number 6, as Wilson points out in the book, as a result of death, they no longer have a share in all that is done. Right? When we die, we don't know what happens here on this earth. We don't get to go up in the viewing booth and see what happens and control what happens with all of our stuff. Right? We might have everything laid out what we want done with our stuff. Right? I want all the forks to go to Brian and Stephanie, and I want all of the pillows to go to Jamie's house so he can have pillow fights with Emmett. Right? And I want all of this to go. You know what's probably going to happen to all this stuff? Take it to the Goodwill, right? Well, we don't know. We're not going to have an idea. But there's going to be an empty chair. There's going to be an empty seat. But eventually, the memory of us towards everyone else is going to be forgotten. What happens when our kids pass on? What happens when our grandkids pass on? Who's going to remember the legend of Jamie Richardson, right? Who's going to remember the stories? There might be a few here and there, and if someone says, oh, do you remember so-and-so? And be like, oh, yeah, I remember him, and it might spark memories for a few minutes, but eventually what's going to happen to those memories again? They're going to go away. But we prepare ourselves for eternity, where this life, when it's over, when this life is done, when we stand before God in the day of judgment, we can hear, well done, thou good and faithful servant, enter the joys of your Lord. And we can be with God for all eternity. That's what we're after. That's our hope. And that's only when we have a relationship with God. Any thoughts up through that point there? We are out of time this evening, and so we'll pick up there on Sunday. Thank you for your comments and your attention.
Good evening. I want to welcome everyone here tonight to the Wednesday night Bible study, and we're going to continue on